All right, tonight I am super excited to introduce Deb H. from Akron, Ohio. Deb, welcome to the meeting.
Hello, everyone. My name is Deb. I'm a real alcoholic. It is lovely to be with all of you tonight. I am sitting in Akron, Ohio, which means it's 10 minutes after 10 for me. So, you know, since I was a couple of years sober, I don't go to really late meetings anymore. So we'll see how this goes. And I accidentally double booked myself, so I just finished telling my story at the top of last hour. So I'm a little tired of hearing my own my own self-talk. But what an honor and a privilege it is to participate in Alcoholics Anonymous, right? And the fact that we get to do it by Zoom these days is just, it's just fascinating, right? Because history is literally being written for, the Alcoholics Anonymous history books going forward. And so it's just a really cool big change. Did I say I was Deb? I was a real alcoholic? I think I did. My sobriety date is March 15th, 1987, and for that I'm super, super grateful. It's funny, I was a GSR in my home group last year, and and we were talking about, and I was also living in Texas at the time, and we were trying to get the old timers to agree to allow the GSRs who lived kind of in the middle of Texas, because you could spend a day driving across Texas and not be finished. And so they were driving in like vast distances just to come to assemblies, and we were like, why can't we just let them Zoom into assemblies? And they were, like, oh my God, we'll never do such things, right? AA is only face to face. And they were just, up in arms and railing against innovation. And just a handful of months later, and we are all just slammed onto Zoom, like, holding on to tiny little, faces and tiny little tiles for our own, for our life, right? And I was like, it only takes a pandemic to get old timers to change. I mean, honestly, why, I don't know what we're so upset about. Just a little pandemic to push us right over the edge. So I lived in Texas. So I've lived in 13 different locations, right? One day I get a call from a gal, and she's like, so I'm looking for the Deb H that lives in New Orleans. And I was like, well, I used to live in New Orleans. She goes, yeah, but I don't think it's you, because she also lived in Washington, D.C. And I was like, yeah, I lived in Washington, D.C. for a couple of years. And she was like, but where are you now? And I was like, well, I'm in Texas now. And she goes, no, this Deb doesn't live in Texas. And so she's rolling through. And so I'm really fortunate in that I've gotten to experience Alcoholics Anonymous in literally 13 different communities across my sobriety. And I'm really grateful for that. The first time that I moved and I left Ohio, this area here is where I got sober 33 years ago. When I originally left here and left Ohio, I went to South Carolina first. And I got to South Carolina, and I was like, they totally don't do AA right there. I mean, they don't, right? And so I was just, not that I was judgy, but they were just like, would you just sit down and just shut up, right? Just be part of us. Just be part of us. And I learned how to just come all the way in and sit all the way down and be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. No matter what town I'm in, no matter, if I'm on a computer screen or if I'm actually sitting in your meetings with you. But the ability to come all the way in and sit all the way down is something that is just not lost on me. I think that it's probably the most important thing that we can teach newcomers how to do. Because if you come all the way in and you sit all the way down, that means that you're going to sit down right in the middle of the process of Alcoholics Anonymous, and you'll get onto the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and you'll be delivered, if your experience is anything like mine and thousands of people I've met along the way, you will be delivered into such a deep and effective relationship with God that you will accidentally end up with long-term sobriety. and living a life full of purpose and living a life that you wouldn't have known to ask for. That has been my experience. I started drinking alcohol when I was 9 years old. And I did that because I wanted to know what alcohol was. I wanted to know why that stuff in those dark little bottles was so darn important. It was really important in my family. My dad has a vicious case of alcoholism, and my mother would benefit greatly from, I don't know, 30 years of Al-Anon, but she just won't go. And so I grew up in this family where, I mean, alcoholism ran my family. I didn't know that when I was 9 years old. What I knew is that I was scared all the time. What I knew is that the behavior around me was really unpredictable. What I knew is that I was, I would do the exact same thing today that I did yesterday, and yesterday it was fine, and for some reason today it's not. And I seemed to always be hurting. And I walked around my life when I was 9 years old and drank alcohol for the first time was on high alert. And that's really the best way I can describe it. I literally was on high alert all the time. I didn't know what the right thing to do was. I didn't know what the right thing to think was. I was just surviving alcoholism, and I didn't even know what alcoholism was. So I took my first drink of alcohol because I wanted to know what that stuff was. It was really important to my dad that he have a ton of it, and it was really important to my mom that he not have another one. And so they were just in constant conflict in my house, and I wanted to understand it. And I've always been someone where if I don't understand something, I'm going to go do research and figure it out. And nobody would take me seriously when I was asking them what that stuff was when I was a little kid. And so I went and did some research. And what happened for me is really simple. The effect produced by alcohol was stunning for me. It was stunning for me. It delivered me from being terrified. I actually experienced freedom from fear for the very, very first time. And I was like, oh my God, this stuff is amazing. It's amazing. Like all of a sudden I understood why my dad drank so much. And what I also thought, I remember this like it was yesterday. I remember thinking, my mom's terrified too. Why doesn't she drink this stuff? Right? Like I just intuitively knew that she was as scared as the rest of us, but she didn't do anything about it. She just raged all the time. And my dad raged all the time. And alcohol was the thing that seemed, at least from time to time, he'd pass out and stop. And my mom didn't have that. And so that's how I got my start on the road to my own case of alcoholism. I had no idea I was going to drink my way into alcoholism because I didn't know what it was. But I made a decision after that very first night of drinking that I was going to drink as much of this stuff as often as I could. I mean, why wouldn't I? Why wouldn't I? Right? I mean, there are pictures of me when I'm a little girl and I have my shoulders are pinned to my ears and my little hands are balled up in fists, right? And I just look angry and ready. Like just ready for whatever came my way. And when I drank, my little fist let loose and my shoulders came all the way off my ears and I exhaled all the way and I was like, man, this stuff is awesome. It's just awesome. I forged a relationship with alcohol at that time, and I didn't want to let it go. What happened for me is that alcoholism set in very, very quickly, and it took me down very, very, very quickly. So I started drinking when I was 9. By the time I was 15 years old and a sophomore in high school, I was a daily drinker. And not just a little bit of a daily drinker. Like I was maintenance drinking in the day and I was drinking to oblivion at night. That's how that went. The obsession to drink was constantly on me, and the phenomenon of craving barely got a break. And I just drank all the time. And when I wasn't able to drink, because when you're 14 and 15 years old, there's a lot of logistics to drinking well and safely, right? And to not getting caught. And during those times when I could not get it together, I would have to go through a significant period of withdrawal just to be okay enough, constitutionally capable to do things like, sit still and be present, be where I needed to be for a few minutes while I came up with a scam to get out of there so I could go drink some more. When I drank, there wasn't anything, I had no, great car crashes. I didn't get to go to, prison multiple times. I didn't drink away families. I mean, the consequences of drunkenness that we often share, and we try to define alcoholism by the consequences of drunkenness, right? We've all sat in those first step meetings, right, where we get the litany of the crap that goes wrong when we're drunk. And it's like, well, of course, but anybody who gets drunk has the opportunity to experience consequences of drunkenness, alcoholic or not. That is not the thing that defines us. And I'm so grateful that the doctor's opinion is in the Big Book, because it says very clearly in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous that the thing that separates us from others, the thing that makes us alcoholic, is the allergy of the body, and the fact that when we swallow alcohol, an allergy is triggered, and the manifestation of that allergy is that the more I drink, the thirstier I get. That doesn't happen to average people. That doesn't happen to hard drinkers. Hard drinkers also have an obsession to drink. Hard drinkers build a life and a lifestyle that supports consuming lots and lots of booze. Hard drinkers do not experience the phenomena of craving like I experience the phenomena of craving. It's the thing that makes me alcoholic. It's the thing that binds me to you if I want to live a life worth living. That's the thing that we share. That's why that's why we'll do things like, drink past the incomparable or incomprehensible demoralization, right? Because we can't stop. And when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous at 15 years old, after going through a treatment that I didn't want, and having all the adults in my life overreacting, right? That's how I would explain the story back then, right? Everybody was just overreacting, and if people would have just calmed down, right, everything would have been fine. So, they overreacted. I ended up in a treatment center. I checked into that treatment center in a blackout because I was a blackout drinker, and I liked it that way. And I spent 40 days in that treatment center, and I learned as little as possible. And I was constantly just looking for a way out. I just needed to get out of that place. I just needed to have a drink, right? The solution to my alcoholism was not in treatment. The solution to my alcoholism was sitting down in the middle of you and building a relationship with God, but I didn't know that. What I thought my solution was at the time was, if you'll just let me out of here, I'm just going to have another drink. And I've learned my lesson. I'm not going to drink like that anymore. I don't have to. I got it, right? Like I've been off this stuff for 40 days. If you guys will just let me out of here, like, I'll be more responsible. Okay, fine. I'll even promise you that I won't drink, right? But in my mind, I knew I was going to drink. I just wasn't going to drink that much, right? I just won't drink as much, and I won't go there. Right? I won't cross the tracks, and I won't go and hang out with those people, right? Because they hurt me, and I don't want to hang out there anyway. So I'm just gonna drink less, so then I won't have to cross the tracks, and my life will be fine. You'll see. Like, I've learned my lesson. I really have. And I got out of that treatment center, and I had no intention of becoming a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I had no intention at all. Of being abstinent from alcohol. I had no intention of any of that. My sister, who is less than 2 years older than I am, she was my person, man. When you're growing up in an alcoholic household like mine, you better have a person. And she was my person. Like, I had her six all the time, and she had mine. And like, I wouldn't run a scam if she wasn't in on it, and vice versa. And we, I drank, she did drugs. That way there was no conflict of interest between us. I didn't do drugs and she didn't drink, that, so we weren't in each other's stashes. I mean, we had a system, right? It's important to have a person, and you got to have a system. And we had a person. She was my person, and we had a system. And when I went into that treatment center and I was in that blackout for 2 full days, I was a mess. Not only did I tell them the truth about everything I had been actually, like, how much I'd been drinking and how often and with who and all that mess, but I also apparently shared a little something about what my sister had been up to. So, because they again, right, if you listen to me tell it when I was 15 years old, they overreacted again. and went and, kidnapped my sister and brought her into that treatment center as well. And so, somebody's sharing their screen. Are we good? Okay. So my sister ends up in this treatment center. It became really clear to her pretty quickly that like I had obviously given them some intel, which is what got her thrown in that treatment center. She wouldn't speak to me, right? I mean, she's my person, and now we're in this place together, and she won't even speak to me. She won't look at me. She was so angry. And I got out of that treatment center 10 days before she did, and she stopped me when I was getting on the elevator, and she said, "You do not relapse until I get out of here. It is your fault that I'm in here, and you will not be out there drinking while I'm in this place. You wait on me." She said, "You go get my stuff, and you go get your bottles, and you wait, but you will not be out." And I was like, fine, fine, fine. So I did that. Like, I went home, and all I wanted to do was have a drink, right? Because here's the thing. At that time, I cannot be sober and comfortable at the same time. I can't be sober and sleep at the same time. I can't be sober and sit still. Like, being a newcomer is so hard. It's so hard. And I had no God, no AA, no desire to be sober, none of it. But I'm in the middle of forced sobriety. And anyway, so I went and I got my bottles and I got my sister's stuff, and I waited on her to get home from treatment. And when she got home from treatment, I was so freaking excited because I'd been sober for like 50 days against my will. I don't know about you guys, but 50 days without anything to drink when it's the only thing you want to do, that's a long time. And she finally gets home, and I take her upstairs, and I lift up the floorboards. It's our stash spot, and I show her everything that I got, and she informs me that she had something happen to her when she was in treatment. The counselors called it a spiritual experience, and she said that she was going to stay sober and we were going to go to AA. And I was like, no, no, we're not. No, we're not. I said, I got our stuff. Like, we are relapsing tonight. And she said, no, we're going to go to AA. And I said, go to AA? I said, you don't even drink. She said, I know, but they said NA sucks, so I have to go to AA. And I was like, oh, you got to be kidding me. And so off we go to AA. And so my mom drops us off like 15 minutes before the AA meeting starts. I mean, my cool card is officially gone at that point. And so we went to meetings for a little while, and here's how we went to all of them. My mom would drop us off. We would stand outside long enough to be late. We would walk into the meeting late. In Northeast Ohio 33 years ago, and still true to this day, the majority of AA meetings are held in church basements. And many of them use metal folding chairs on concrete floors. And I'm here to tell you, if you drag a metal folding chair across a concrete floor, you can make a lot of noise. I mean, you can really be a total disruption to the entire room. And I just found utter delight in that. I really did. I didn't want to be in meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, and so I was going to punish you for me being there. So I would go in late. I would drag my chair. I didn't even like coffee at the time, but I'd have 3 cups at every meeting. So I was up, down, up, down, up, down. I mean, we smoked at the time when I got sober. Like, everybody smoked. And I didn't smoke when I got to AA, but I learned, right, because I needed to fit in. So, I'm bumming cigarettes from people. I mean, I'm just busy. I'm busy, and I'm mobile, and I'm as disruptive as I could possibly be. And I would leave every single meeting early because I wasn't going to get in your circle, because I don't know the words to that prayer, and I'm not really sure why you pray anyway. because I wasn't raised in church. I wasn't taught anything about prayer. But if there was a God, he wasn't going to have anything to do with me. So thank you very much. I'm not going to start talking to him because I prefer to stay off his radar. And so I am sneaking out of every meeting early. So that's how I'm going to Alcoholics Anonymous. I mean, can you imagine? Right? Whew. So the president of Alcoholics Anonymous at the time, his name was Mac Shadburn. And Mac had been sober since Christ was a child. I mean, this guy was old, and he'd been sober a long time. Like second generation AA guy. And his partner in crime, her name was Jane. And Jane was also very old, and she had also been sober forever. And Mac was always at the back of the room by the entry door, and Jane always sat in the front of the room by the podium. And the two of them ran Alcoholics Anonymous. And every time I was sneaking out, it seemed that Mac was in every meeting that I went to. And he just glared at me, right? Because he loved Alcoholics Anonymous, and I was treating it so poorly. And anyway, so I'm sneaking out of a meeting one night, and Mac had gotten up out of his chair, and he was standing in the doorway, and he wouldn't let me pass. And he just looked down at me, and he said, "Get in the circle." And he had his finger, and he went like this, right? And so into the room I went, and I got in the circle. And you guys said the Lord's Prayer, and I went to leave, and Mac hadn't gotten in the circle. He was still standing in the doorway. And he wouldn't let me pass. And he just looked at me and he said, "Are you alcoholic?" And I gave him the only answer I had at the time, which was a 15-year-old shrug of the shoulders with all the attitude I could muster. And then he said, "Can you control your drinking?" And I gave him the same answer. And he reaches in his pocket and he gave me $5 and he said, "Here's $5, go find out. I'm tired of you treating Alcoholics Anonymous like a joke." And so I went and I found my sister, and I was like, "Go get your $5, man. We are out of here." I'm like, finally, somebody with some authority around here is telling me that I can go drink again. Like, I was super excited. And guys, I mean, that was the truth of the matter, right? Like, I went into treatment on the Saturday after Thanksgiving in 1986. This is the middle of March 1987, and I am sober that entire time against my will. I haven't worked a step. I haven't sat all the way down in Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm not hanging out with you. I'm not having conversations with you. I am showing up late. I am leaving early. I am not a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm just hanging out here to stay out of trouble. And I needed a drink. I needed a drink. And so I was going to drink less, though, right? Because I learned my lesson, right? I'm not going to drink like that anymore. I'm not going to drink the whole bottle. I'm not going to cross the tracks. I'm not going to do any of that stuff again. I got a plan, right? And so I have my 3 shots and 2 beers, because to me that is incredibly moderate drinking, right? Usually when I tell my story and there are Al-Anons, right, that makes them gasp, like, oh my God. But it is. That was moderate drinking compared to, a fifth of vodka and anything else I could get my hands on. And anyway, my 3 shots and 2 beers, it didn't work. Long story short, I come to the next day. I look in the mirror for the first time in a couple of years. I am very sick. I'm filthy. I'm black and blue. I have no idea what happened to me. And I'm coming out of another blackout. And I look in the mirror and I hear 2 things, right? First thing I hear is Mac Shadburn's voice. If it doesn't work, you get back here, but you better be ready to do something different, right? That's what he said to me on the way out the door. And the second thing I heard was a voice I didn't recognize, but the voice was the truth, and it said, "You will always drink just like this." Right? Because that was the great lie, right? The great lie is, I've learned my lesson. I'm not going to do that again. I've learned my lesson. It's not going to be like that. I've learned my lesson, right? Like I can stop short of that. I won't have to cross the tracks. I won't have to do those things, right? Right? That was the lie. And the truth slipped in, and I heard it that morning. That was March 15th, 1987. I walked back into a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. I got there on time. I sat in the middle. I got 1 cup of coffee. I stayed seated, and I got in your stupid circle. And when the meeting was wrapping up, and the circle was done, I went to leave that room, and guess who was standing in the doorway again? It was Mac. And he just looked at me again and he said, so did you get a sponsor? And I just looked at him and I was like, and he just went like this again. Right? So back in the room I went, walked up to every woman that I could see, and I was like, will you sponsor me? And every woman in there was like, no. Oh, honey, oh, absolutely not. And so I went to leave the room again, and Mac was like, well, did you get a sponsor? And I said, no one in here will sponsor me. And he said, that's a lie. I said, I'm not asking her. And he just went like this again. Because I had to go up to the front of the room and stand on the line to talk to the queen of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? Her name was Jane, and she was ancient and sober a really, really long time. And I had avoided ever getting anywhere close to Jane because Jane was really, like, she knew everyone. And she's the old-timer that not only knew your name, but she knew something significant about your life. And so when you would talk to her, she would ask you, like, oh, how was that job interview last week? Or how are your children? Or, you know, did they get into college? I mean, just she knew something significant about everybody. And I wasn't going to stand and wait on the line to be rejected, right? Because I just intuitively knew that I wasn't worth her time, attention, or affection. So I avoided Jane at all costs. And here I was standing on the line. Because apparently, right, she's the one I was supposed to ask to be my sponsor. And so I got, and Jane, you know, not only was she old, she had this white hair and she wore it in a loose bun on the back of her head, and she smoked cigarettes on an extender, right? She was just like larger than life. And anyway, I got up and she took a long drag off that cigarette extender, and I looked at her and I just said, will you sponsor me? And she blew the smoke out that she had just inhaled, and she said, oh, honey, why should I? I mean, right, like I didn't deserve that, right, from my antics in Alcoholics Anonymous. And instead of telling her where to shove the cigarette extender, which is all I had, right, I said, because I need to be sober and I don't know how. And I was like, oh, my God, who said that? Oh, because that's certainly not something I had. And the next day, I'm sitting around in the evening acting like I'm doing homework, but I'm thinking about the fact that I've just turned my will and my life over to a bunch of 75-year-olds, right? And I was like, and they say it's one day at a time, but I know they're talking about the rest of my life, right? They're talking about the rest of my life. I'm 15. Like, that's going to be 80 freaking years, right? So what they're saying is that I cannot have a drink of alcohol for another 80 freaking years. I'm like, it's easy if you're getting sober at 70. I mean, you're almost dead anyway. I mean, right? Like, that's the kind of stuff I would say. I mean, and was it any wonder that nobody liked me? So I'm sitting and I'm thinking, and here's this enormous car comes floating in my driveway. I don't know if you guys remember the Ford LTDs from the 70s, right? Some of you might. But those things were enormous. They would float down the road. You know, and you had to, when you're driving it, you have to line up the seam on the hood with the stripe on the side of the road just to know if you're actually in your lane or not. I mean, they're just hilarious. But there's this enormous car comes floating in my driveway, and I went out and there's two old guys sitting in the front seat of this car listening to country music, smoking cigarettes and drinking coffee. And I knock on the window and they roll down the window, and I was like, can I help you? And they just looked and they said, Jane sent us, get in the car. And I was like, what? No, I'm good. Like, I went to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous yesterday. I'm not drinking today. I'm not even leaving my house. Like, I'm going to go to bed. I'll be sober. And I wasn't even talking. They just said, Jane sent us, get in the car. And I went in the house and I was like, Ma, AA's here. She was like, okay, honey, have fun. And I'm like, what is going on with my life? And so I went out and I got in the back seat of this Ford LTD from the 70s. And I'm here to tell you, you can fit 12 newcomers in there. You can. You can fit 12 newcomers in the back seat of one of those cars. And I got in and off we went. And here's my early experience in Alcoholics Anonymous. Mac had called an emergency group conscience meeting, and he said, these girls got to go. They're ruining Alcoholics Anonymous, and I don't think they're alcoholic anyway. They got to go. And he had everybody but one man in that room, right? The group conscience was, they got to go. Mac's like, well, I'll throw them out. And they're like, that's fine, right? So they were all rallying to toss us out of Alcoholics Anonymous. And thank God for our service structure, right? That after we have a vote, if there's somebody who dissents from the group's conscience, we allow the minority voice to have the floor, should they want it. And there was one man, his name was Bill Long, and Bill Long was sitting in the back of that room, as the story is told to me. And Bill Long and I spent hours and hours and hours together. And I'm here to tell you, Bill Long does not talk. He just does not talk. He is not that guy. He is the guy that will show up early. He'll drag 4 newcomers with him to the meeting. He will set it up. He will make the coffee. He will do all of that without saying a single word. And Bill Long was the dissenting opinion in that room, and he raises his hand from the very back of the room, and they were all like, oh my God, Bill has his hand raised. And so they called out, and what he said was, I believe that God gave us those girls, therefore they're our responsibility, and we should probably try to put them on the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, don't you think? And he turned the room on a dime. And Mac said, yeah, but it says in the big book, if they don't know if they're alcoholic, they should try to control their drinking. And they were like, that's fine, Mac. You know, you can encourage them to go do that. And then somebody said, but what are we going to do if they come back? And somebody said, they're going to have a sponsor. And everybody looked at Jane. And Jane said, I am too old. I don't have enough energy to sponsor those girls. And somebody in the group said, Jane, if you take them on, we'll all help. And so I had a Monday crew, a Tuesday crew, a Thursday crew, a Friday crew, a Saturday crew. I mean, every single night of the week, there was another set of old guys sitting in my driveway in another old car waiting on me to get in the car. And we went to meetings across Northeast Ohio. And here's the thing. 33 years ago, you didn't just go to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. After the meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, you had to go to the donut shop. And you know what you talk about at the donut shop after the meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous? Everything you just talked about at the meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. Like, everything got rehashed. And if it was a speaker, and most of them were, that's where the speaker's inventory got taken. Right? We're just taking the pulse, right? But what happened at the donut shop is that I got to hear the backstory of Alcoholics Anonymous. I got to spend time with these old-timers who literally were second-generation AA, who honestly believed that if you worked the program out of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, that you would have an experience sufficient enough to bring about long-term recovery, and that you would have a purpose for life that you would never, ever outgrow. And so that's what they did at the donut shop. They took the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and they walked me through it. And when it said, do this, we did that. And when it said, write this, we wrote that. And they put me onto the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm a product of group sponsorship. I had lots of sponsors. And they had divided up the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, and different small teams of old-timers took responsibility for getting me through certain steps. They taught me about the 4 absolutes, which are those beautiful, beautiful tenets left over from the Oxford groups. They taught me that those were the things that I was going to use to put in place of my character defects when I got to step 6 and 7. And I realize I might be talking about something you guys aren't familiar with, but the 4 absolutes are absolute love, honesty, purity, and unselfishness. So anyway, they taught me about those. They walked me through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. They tricked me into praying, right? Like, I had no frame of reference for God, but they tricked me into praying. And when I was like, well, I don't know who God is. And they're like, we didn't either. And I was like, well, how are you supposed to pray to something you don't know? And one of the guys is like, well, just borrow mine. I was like, what do you mean borrow yours? Right? And so he tells me his concept of God, and he said, pray to my God for a while until you get your own. Like, don't make too hard of terms about this, right? And so I borrowed some random guy's concept of God, and I was like, okay, here's his concept of God, right? Like, are you going to keep me sober? You know, but they just wouldn't allow me to talk my way out of getting onto the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. They taught me how to pray by highlighting and outlining all of the tiny little prayers that are throughout the text of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? Like one day I was like, did you pray about it? Did you pray about it? And I was like, I don't know how to pray, right? And the guy snatches my big book and he underlines and highlights all the tiny little prayers, and he scoots the book across the table at the donut shop and said, I don't care which one, just pick one and try it, right? Just try it. Like, just do it. Just do it. We don't care if you don't believe it. We really don't care if you don't believe it. Just do it anyway. And so they literally just tricked and cajoled me into the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And they did things like they sat there and they told me stories. And they told me stories, and so not all of them made sense, right? Like one night I was taking my problems to them, right? So I'm a 15, 16-year-old girl in my first year of sobriety, right? And so everything's a big deal. So I take my problems to the donut shop and I lay out my problems to them, and I'm expecting them to help me fix my problem. And there's this guy, and he just tells these random stories, and everybody acts like they are gold, right? And so he says, well, you know, a horse will always find his way to his home barn at the end of the day. And I'm waiting for the rest of it, and that was all of it. And I was like, how in the world is that supposed to help me? Right? How is that supposed to help anyone? But that's the kind of they would say that stuff to me, like somehow that was supposed to make a difference in my life. But I can tell you what it would do. I would spend 3 days trying to figure out what the meaning was of that story, right? Or those little sayings. And so I would stop thinking about whatever ridiculousness I was all spun up about, and I would think about, I wonder if it's true that a horse, no matter where, like, you know, how do they find their way home? Right? They're just saying stupid things to get me to think about something other than myself. And when I was sober for a couple of years, I was graduating from high school, and they asked me what I was planning on doing, and I said, well, I'm just going to get a job at the factory and, you know, hang out here, and eventually I'll, you know, get my own apartment and we'll, you know, whatever. And they're like, no, you're going to college. And I was like, you know, I thought about it once, but I'm not going to go to college. Like, I'm getting pretty good at spades. I'm just going to stay here with you guys, right? Because I would skip school on Fridays, and we'd play spades after the noon meeting, right? Like, you know, I had finally found this group of people that were consistent and loving, but pushed me and gave me things that no one else had. I was like, I'm not leaving you. That's ridiculous. And they're like, get us the paperwork to get into college. And these are all blue collar people. Most of them hadn't even graduated from high school. And I was like, no, I'm good. And they said, you're not good. Get us the papers. And so I went to the guidance counselor just to shut them up, and I got the package of papers that would get me in to take the ACT and a couple of colleges that were close by to apply to and whatnot. And I took them to the donut shop, and I was a total brat, so I wouldn't even fill them out. You know, and so one of the old steel workers, he took the papers from me one night, and he said, by God, you're going to college. And I was like, well, I'm not filling that out. And so he took them from me, and he starts filling them out for me. And the first thing he's like, what's your last name? Right? Because we don't do last names. And so he's filling out my, you know, my form to, you know, register to take the ACT, and he doesn't know my name. And anyway, they end up filling in all of these papers, or filling out all these forms for me. And they end up making me go to college, right? They kick me out of the nest. I went to a college a couple hours away. And And I wasn't allowed to go any further than that because they wanted me to come home at least once a quarter to do laundry so they could lay their eyes on me to make sure I was doing okay. And anyway, and so, fast forward to today. I mean, I'm 33 years sober. I have a bachelor's degree, a master's degree. I do work that I love. I've lived in 13 different communities. I'm in the middle of Alcoholics Anonymous. I have been in the middle of Alcoholics Anonymous the majority of my sobriety. I have continued to surrender my life. I have continued, surrender is not an event, right? Surrender is a process. And so as more has been revealed to me over the years, I surrender more. I have a deep and effective relationship with God today that blows my mind sometimes. I mean, I am really clear that I am a precious child of God. I belong to Him. I am here to do His work. And that, I mean, even the jobs that I have, I'd gotten promoted, and I moved to Washington, D.C., and my office was in the Pentagon. So I show up for work like on the very first day, right? And I'm not I never wore a uniform. I'm not military, but my office is now in the Pentagon, and I'm going to be working for a 2-star general there. And I'm standing outside the Pentagon looking at this enormous building, right? Like just having that moment where I'm like, oh my God, I got to walk in there, right? And find my office. And I'm having that, and I walk in, and I eventually find my way to my office, and my boss is like, come and walk with me for a minute. And so he takes me on this walking tour around the Pentagon, and he takes me down into the 4th corridor, which is where the plane struck the Pentagon on 9/11. And there's this room like tucked in away, and you walk in this room, and it's called the Room of Remembrance. And on one wall it's got a wall fountain, and the water is running over the names of everyone who was killed in the Pentagon on that day. And I'm just standing there in the middle of this room, right? And I'm trying to catch my breath. And I asked my boss, I said, why did you bring me here? And he said, because I want you to know that what you do makes a difference. And I want you to know where to come when you're wondering why you're here. He said, and I want you to know why you work for the United States Marine Corps. And I just looked at him and I said, but sir, I hate to tell you this, but I actually work for God. And he said, but you do it through the United States Marine Corps, young lady. And I was like, hoorah, all right, But that's, it's just been this amazing life, an amazing life. And I can tell you that the last part of my life that I surrendered to God, right? Oh my gosh, I was such a holdout. It's romantic relationships. I was pretty sure that God did not know what handsome was, right? So I held out, and I picked my own boyfriends. Thank you very much. Anyway, I don't have near enough time to walk you through all of that, but God had His way with me in that arena too. And so I finally had to give that up. And I had to allow God to get in the middle of romantic entanglements for me. And I finally had the right guy, the right way, for the right reasons, in the right order. It's amazing when it all lines up like that, right? It just doesn't happen very often for us alcoholics. And I married this guy, and he's just an amazing human. And what we did anyway, I wish I could tell you guys the whole story. But what we ended up doing is we ended up putting God in the middle of our relationship, and then eventually God ended up in the middle of our marriage. And we needed it to happen like that. Like it had to be, God on top, and then AA, and then Lee, right? It had to be in that order for me. And he was fine with that. And he went away to war multiple times. And when Lee went away to war, and I was back here, I experienced powerlessness like I had never known before. But what happened for me was that you guys had delivered me into the arms of God. And so I had an active and profound relationship with God. And when I was feeling that powerlessness, because there was one point I was like, oh my God, like people are shooting at my husband on purpose, right? I am not okay. And so the only option that I had was to collapse into the arms of God. The only option that I had was to stay plugged into the source of power that had no end. That's all I had. And so I understood surrendering and continuing to surrender and continuing to surrender. And when Lee finally got back from war, he went to war a couple of times, and when he got back from war, he was finally done, right? He was very close to retiring from he was a Marine. He was very close to retiring from the Marine Corps. And so we'd finally started planning for the future again, and he was killed on his way home from base. I mean, just motor vehicle accident, and he's gone. And what I know from that is this. There are going to be moments in all of our lives when we are going to have to rely on the relationship we actually have with God, not the relationship we wish we had. And in my case, because I had spent so many months with Lee gone away to war and having to rely on God and having to know that I was okay with or without him, that I was okay no matter how I felt, because I learned how to live in the presence, when the call came and I was told that Lee was dead, a prayer began in me. I didn't begin to pray. A prayer began in me because I had a deep and effective relationship with God that had been tried already. And I had surrendered and collapsed deeper and deeper and deeper into his arms. And I can honestly tell you that he consoled me through that, and I grieved out loud, and I healed, and I emerged from that being beyond faith. I no longer have faith in God. I no longer just have trust in God. I know that I am his. I know. And no matter, I mean, whether my prayer life is intact, whether I'm meditating as much as I want to, no matter what it is I'm doing in my spiritual practice, I know today exactly who I am and exactly where I belong. And it is in the middle of Alcoholics Anonymous, so that I can have the kind of relationship with God that I need and want. I hear him through you guys. I do. I have to be in the middle of Alcoholics Anonymous because I have to have a relationship with God. And so I need to practice these principles in all of my affairs so that you and I stay on good terms with one another, because God is going to speak through me for you, and God is going to speak through you for me. That's how this thing works. And I really think it's that simple, right? Trust God, clean house, and help others. And just come all the way in and sit all the way down. It's totally worth it. I think I'm out of time. Thanks, guys.
Deb, thank you so much. So grateful that you came and stayed up late to share with us. And I absolutely loved that message you just shared at the end that spoke to me. I needed to hear it. So God spoke through you for sure. And I have asked tonight for Judy N. to read the promises for us.